Hi there, and welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this week we're going to be talking about writing first drafts. But before we do that, we'll do our usual catch-up of what we've been doing in the world of writing this week. Dave, do you want to go first?
Okay, yes. It's been a bit of a...
Writing first drafts. But before we do that, we'll do our usual catch-up of what we've been doing in the world of writing this week.
Oops, you got a bit of an echo there.
Yeah. That was you. I was checking my tabs to make sure it wasn't me.
Right, yes. This week's been a bit of a mixed bag for me because I've been what I like to call poor-locked several times, which is based on a story about Coleridge, who was in the middle of writing a poem when a brush seller from Porlock rang the doorbell. He went to answer, and by the time he'd got rid of the brush salesman, he'd lost his poem. So on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I got called or doorbelled in the middle of writing something, and it knocked my rhythm off completely. So by the time it happened on Wednesday, I was just generally peeved off with the whole being interrupted thing, and I just couldn't get back into writing for the rest of the day. So I think that my message from there for people who are interrupted in the middle of doing something and find that they can't get back into it straight away is that your writing time is important to you. What you are doing is equivalent to doing a job. So you have the same right to feel annoyed when someone does it as you would if they turned up in the middle of your office or on the factory floor and just said, "Can I talk to you about your television packages," while you're trying to get your day job done. So it's fine for you to be angry with them if it's irritated you that you've been interrupted. And also, it's fine once the interruption's happened for you not to go back to your desk or your pad of paper or whatever, pick it up and go straight back into it. If you need to take time to get yourself back into your writing space, that's fine too. There's no guilt that you should be bearing for not being able to pick your pen up the moment you shut the door and carry straight on from where you left off. But once I got that out of the way, I had a relatively productive week. Published another part of Seven Stones.
What part's that up to now? Must be
58. So it's been going since January of last year. So apart from missing a week for the Yule holidays, it's been going solidly through. So that's going quite well. And I'm looking at putting together another compilation to follow the previous one. So what else have I done this week? Because I got distracted for 3 days, I didn't manage to finish the draft that I was intending to have done by the end of this week to release under my pseudonym. But I've got it most of the way, and so far it's good stuff, I think. So potentially that's going to be something I can put out there and know that it's a good story. So how it sells, whether it sells, where it sells is going to be dependent on the sales and marketing rather than it being a different story. So that's that. And of course, I've prepared for this.
As for me, I finished Adventure, which ended up about 55,000 words, which we reckoned when we last spoke that it would be about 55,000 words. So that's kind of bang on. I think it might be 54,500 or something. And then I started outlining Sorcery, which is the next book in the series. And I know what the start is going to do because we discussed that before. And then I need to work out at least in broad strokes, what we're going to do for the rest of the book. So because we have two lead characters this time, in Adventure we just had Edmund, who sorcery is set later when he has a kid, so it's from his daughter's perspective and his perspective. So we need to keep both of their stories going and have them come together at the end so that they actually have a satisfying ending. So I've been working on kind of first a very kind of loose outline of how they would do that, and then I need to go back through it and fill in the details, make it interesting. And my Facebook ads collapsed. I don't know if I mentioned that last weekend.
I think they were going quite well last week when you mentioned
it. So I had I forget, like 20,000 say, or something like that, number of people in the Terry Pratchett fan group, and I'd been selling to 1,000 a day, so I ran out. Like they'd all seen it multiple times, and they were like, "Yeah, I still don't want to buy it." So the sales just dropped into practically zero. So then I stopped that, and I tried to create a new group, and that failed. And then I tried to create another new group, and this one seems to be going a lot better. So the one thing that it did expose me to was a non-voluntary experiment where, without marketing, my sales went to about one book a day across 14 titles, which means that the marketing is not just selling that series that I'm advertising, but it's also selling all my other books. That people who've already read those or who are not interested in those go and look at something else that I've written and maybe try that. So which means then that the marketing is worth a lot more than I thought it was. So the new rate is about 36% return. So 136. So 100 kroner gets me about 136 kroner. And the new group has 110,000 in it instead of 20,000, so it should last longer. So hopefully that will keep going well.
Yeah.
And the last little bit was that I read a book from start to finish today called Right to Market by Chris Fox, where he has a really great approach to picking what you're going to write next. So his kind of thing is that writing to market, he doesn't mean like create a Hunger Games clone or a Harry Potter clone. He means that most authors have multiple genres or subgenres they like to write in. So do some analysis and figure out which one of those subgenres you want to write in is likely to sell the most amount of books, which seems like a good idea to me. I mean, I've got a long list of things I want to write, so I'd like to know which one will sell.
Yeah.
So that's a very short book. Like, it only took me about an hour and a half, maybe an hour and a half to finish, and it's definitely worth it. It's only $3. So yeah, that was my week in writing. So we'll crack on with our topic, which is writing a first draft. So writing a first draft, for me at least, is just about getting through it. I don't know how it is for other people, but a first draft is, my first drafts are usually underwritten, so they're not publishable as they are, and I can't get them to a stage. Like, I could go very slowly and try and write it so that it'd be close to publishable in a first draft, but then I'd be down to taking years to write something. So I tend to try to get through my first drafts as quickly as I possibly can, and then fix them afterwards. So to take Adventure as an example, for instance, I started writing that in, about mid-January?
Yeah.
And I finished it about a week ago, which is about mid-February, so about a month to write. If I take any longer than that, I tend to get very unmotivated about the whole thing and demotivated and not want to write it and kind of want to move on to something else. So it's best to get through it fast. And yeah. So what are your thoughts, Dave?
Much the same. I mean, as I've mentioned before, potentially as I've mentioned every single week, one of the rules I try to write by is that it's infinitely easier to fix something you've got than it is to fix a blank page. So if you get the story out there, and that's underwriting, doing whatever you need to just get to the end of the story, so you've got the whole thing roughed out, then that gets you something you can fix later. So it's not just writing as fast as you can and then filling in the detail. And sometimes it's deciding not to sweat the fact it doesn't work. So you hit something that doesn't work and just say, oh, I could either stop and fix that now, or I could go, well, I'll move on to something else. Because usually a story's more than one thread. So if your scene where the villain's got Jim Brand hanging over a tank of radioactive piranhas, he's lowering him down, soliloquizing, and suddenly you realize that the villain has a terrible phobia of fish, so the scene just doesn't work, then possibly it's better to not stop there and go, well, okay, well, how am I going to fix this scene? But to just stick a note in saying need to fix scene, and then pick up your first draft again from where your hero has escaped from whatever peril he was needing to escape from, and rocket on to the end. If you get to the bits that just you're writing it through, you're slogging it through, thinking this isn't much fun, no one's going to enjoy reading this, then that's okay, because no one's going to be reading it apart from you. And if you really want to show it to someone else, the person you show it to, because it's a first draft, there are going to be more drafts after this, more drafts after this one that no one else ever has to see apart from you. So don't worry about something that doesn't work, something that doesn't feel quite right. You can always fix it. And if you suddenly realize you need to stick something in to keep the momentum up because you need a name for a village, then if you've got names for villages from your planning stage, which, as we sort of showed in the world building last week, you might have a list of names as part of your world building stage, you might not. If you haven't got a name, then just pick a symbol that you'll be able to find easily with search and replace, because you never write it, like double brackets, and then just write double bracket village and carry on, because you're going to be fixing it later. So you don't need to stop to come up with a name that fits your naming rules.
Well, even you can put in any placeholder. So you don't even have to, you could, if you need a village name, you could say the village of White Carpet. And then if you can't come up with anything better, okay, it's fine, it can stay. But then if you come up with anything better, you can just go back and find all the occurrences of White Carpet and take it out. Like I was going to say that I think it's as well. So every single time I write a first draft, when I get to about 30,000 words through it, I hate it and think it's the worst thing I've ever written. And so I've written 16 books now. There's only 14 published, but there's two more that I've written. And it's pretty much a rule. Like, I get to 30,000 words personally, and I think that this is the biggest load of crap I've ever written, and no one's going to enjoy this. This is going to ruin my reputation as a writer, blah, blah, blah. And then I just keep going anyway. I actually try and push harder then to get through that phase as fast as possible, because once I'm getting to the ending, I know that I'm going to be going, oh, this is nearly over, and all the, fighting the baddie stuff is fun to write and all that kind of thing. So I know it's going to go fine. It's just the middle bit always drags. And then when I get back to it on editing, it's always fine. There's never anything wrong with it. And I get, good reviews back from my readers, and everyone likes it, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just kind of I was just thinking, it's kind of like the sitcoms. They always say on sitcoms that they get a script on Monday and they rehearse it all week. And by the time they get to Friday, when they're going to shoot it in front of a live audience, they've heard the jokes 100 times. So they think, well, this isn't funny at all. This is just boring. And then they put it in front of a live audience, and the live audience laughs like crazy. So if you're writing a book and you're going through your outline, then you're too close to it. You don't think it's clever or funny or anything because you've gone over the outline a bunch of times and then the draft.
But that's definitely true. Because I write and publish one episode of Seven Stones a week, I'm doing outline, first drafts, next draft, polish, edit, final tweaks once a week. And so it's pretty much like getting the sitcom script on a Monday and releasing it to the public at the end of the week. I go over that, and by the end of it, I'm thinking, well, the solution to the problem was trite. The dialogue just doesn't feel like the characters, and the hook at the end, the cliffhanger, because I'm trying to emulate a pulp series, that's never going to hook anyone. That's just flat. It's no threat in it at all. And then you stick it up, and if I get followers saying that it's nerve-wracking and that it's action-packed and so on, and so once I've actually had time to sit back and look at it, yeah, it's good stuff. But definitely, the second time you're going over something, which if you've outlined the first draft will be, it starts to feel, nah, this isn't working. And then unless you can sit down and write the entire draft in a single pass, you're probably going to be coming back to the first draft the next day and reading back what you wrote the previous day just to get an idea for where you were to get you up to speed. So you're reading it over quite a lot. Yeah, definitely first drafts feel worse than the actual book's going to turn out to be, both because you're going to fix all the problems and because you are totally immersed in it. You only see so you've got this beautiful, wonderful, soaring vista of a story in your head, and then the first draft is never going to be that. But all you're going to see is the ways in which it doesn't match this brilliant story that you want to tell.
And it kind of evolves as you write it as well. I mean, the image you had in your head, the human brain is great at kind of saying, and there's something pretty over there. But then when you actually write it, you have to fill in the pretty thing. And it's not going to match something that never existed. So you're then going to say, well, that's not very good. But then when you get back to it, you make it better, or maybe it's fine as it is. A lot of the trouble I think people have with first drafts as well is looking for perfection. So the quote I read in Write to Market today was that look for exceptional, but don't look for perfection, because you're never going to get perfection. So you can certainly try to write an exceptional book, but you shouldn't be trying to write a perfect book. Like the people who've been writing their entire lives, if you look at authors in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they still write flawed books where you go, oh, that wasn't very good. It wasn't up to their usual standard. And they've been writing for 40, 50, 60 years. So expecting that early on in your career you're going to write a perfect book every time is ridiculous. What you should be doing is trying to write the best you possibly can at the time. and makes sure to move on. I mean, I'm editing Shiny New Swindle at the moment, very gradually. It's kind of my plan B stuff when I'm either bored of or sick of writing what I'm currently writing. And it's dreadful as far as my current standards. I know you enjoyed it, Dave, so it's not as dreadful as I think it is, but my current standards of writing, I think it's dreadful, but that's because I've written, 14 books since then or something. I've gotten better. So there's a lot to be said for moving on and knowing that maybe it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be as good as you can possibly get it at the time.
We've had a question from Colin on the YouTube chat thing.
Oh, have we? Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Do you have any techniques, tools for capturing critical thoughts, bigger than village name, about things already written so you don't lose them? Key story changes, character decisions, etc.
So usually, if I get to a certain point where something's going to change dramatically, I just change it from that point going forward, and then go back and fix whatever. On the second draft, I'll fix whatever should have happened and the earlier point in the story. If it's a very minor thing, I just go and fix it. So, for instance, in writing adventure, this is a very, very minor spoiler. It's not the guy doesn't even have a name. So, but there's a barbarian, and we had him appear about two-thirds, three-quarters of the way through the story, and then I remembered, oh, he's dead. He died on the 10th page. We just forgot because he's a very minor character. So that I fixed, because that's just a minor thing. I just said, okay, the barbarian dies, but this is a rogue that they encounter early on. So that, it took me 5 minutes to fix. I'll fix something like that. Anything bigger than that, like if there's a character that I want to change dramatically, I won't change it on the first draft. I'll just change it going forward.
Again, for me, it's using things that I can find easily on a search and replace, because I won't ever use that combination of characters. So I can just stick a note in, safe in the knowledge that when it comes to going through the draft, looking for, well, what were the things I wanted to fix, to change, to have names for, I can just scroll through all of those and extract the notes out at that point. So you can just type double bracket, character has a fanatical hatred of squirrels and loves cheese, and then pick up the story, as Simon says, from that point, as if it's always been that way, and you're going to go and then go back and fix it later. Because what you're looking for, really, getting your first draft from the start to the end without taking breaks unless you need to, is a way that lets you capture your note in a way that you're going to be able to find it, and you don't have to get out of that writing headspace. So some writing programs allow you to take post-it notes that associate with a point in the file, and that's a way of doing it if calling up the post-it note, typing it in, and then closing it and going back to the original text file doesn't break your flow. And for some people, it doesn't. Some people have a separate note app open to make the notes in.
I have a separate document in Scrivener.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the easy way to do it.
Yeah, you then but some people changing to a different window within the program works. For other people, it doesn't. Me, I find it easier to have the notes embedded into my first draft and fish them out. And usually, by the time it gets to beta readers, I've caught them all, and there isn't a sneaky double bracket in there.
Like I was thinking, a good example is Violent Science, of a major change, where I had 6 characters in the Resistance, and about 60% of the way through the book, I went, no, I just want 2. Like 4 of them have never said anything, pretty much. They've said a few little lines, and then they're just there. They're just present.
Yeah.
So I went, oh, well, then I don't need 6, I need 2. So from that point forward, I just referred to those 2 characters and dropped all the others, as it just said, okay, they don't exist. But I didn't fix the first 60% of the book. I just left that for the second draft. I made a note, said these characters don't exist, and went back and just wrote the 2 characters from that point on. So that's how I tackled that. We actually have some more questions from Colin that he emailed to us a few weeks ago.
Yep.
I'm going to. The first. Oh, yeah, I'll read it out. When writing a first draft, how do you combat the desire to rewrite as you think of something different better? What disciplines, techniques do you use to make sure you capture the thought, but don't succumb to the temptation to continually tweak? I've got a to-do section in Scrivener, but I still find myself honing sentences when I should be getting on with the draft. So that's the other side of not writing your first draft, the way you're trying to fix sentences.
Yeah.
Where I would say that's kind of, it's a way of putting off the difficult bit.
Yeah.
Like, it's much easier to hone a sentence than it is to, like, you could sit and look at a sentence for half an hour and keep messing with it.
Yeah.
Than it is to write another 1,000 words in your first draft.
One way to do it that's hard to do is to actually look at the statistics for time spent over several stories. So if you take a story, force yourself to never change anything. Just set the rule, you're not going to change a single word. So you use the nano, just keep typing, leave the dreck in, just keep going. Create your first draft that way, find out how long it takes you, create your second draft, check from initial idea to final product, and then do a story the way you normally do it, letting yourself go back and change things. And see, for a story of approximately the same length, does it produce a faster story one way or the other? Because the first draft, if you take 6 months to write a first draft, and then that first draft comes out, you can redraft it in a couple of days, polish it up, send it out to beta readers. They come back and go, it's great. It all hangs together. I had no problem with it. There are some typos, but that's all I found. Send it out to an editor, get it fixed up, do the final polish, bosh, you're out. And then you write a really rough first draft, and then it takes you, say, 3 months. But then it takes you 2 months to do the redraft, and then another month after that to fix the things that the beta readers found. You haven't saved any time. So then going back, not going back doesn't make a difference. But
I would say that there's another factor in it, though, that is enjoyment.
Yeah.
So even if it takes the same amount of time, if you enjoy the process more, then it may be beneficial to do one or the other.
Yeah.
So if writing the first draft without fixing anything then becomes a more enjoyable process, or fixing every single sentence as you go is a more enjoyable process, then that's also a factor. I mean, I would say the tracking is key, as you mentioned. Like, you need to know, like, I have a little app I made myself that just tracks start and stop time for each project. So I know exactly how many hours. I know, for example, that on Adventure we've used 57 hours so far. Or I used 57 hours so far. Like, I know exactly how long I've used on everything. And I can know if outlining an excessive amount benefits. So, for instance, I have tried outlining more than I usually do, and it ends up taking longer. So the extra outlining didn't actually help. So kind of it's a way of figuring out where the balance is, which way you can write the quickest possible book that's also as good as you can possibly get it.
Yeah, so I was definitely right about enjoyment, because I allow myself a certain amount of tweaking, because I really hate knowing that there's a comma in the wrong place or that there's a stupid typo. So if that's still on the screen, it irks at me. So sometimes if it is go back and fix something really quickly, I will just let myself do it, because knowing that's out of the way lets me focus fully on going forward, rather than having part of my brain go, oh, you need to go back and fix that. You need to go back and fix that.
Mm.
So it's the more you do it, the more you get a feel for the things that you can do it fast enough that the saving in focus for getting that fixed and out of the way is worthwhile. But I don't think I can't think of a situation in which going back and fixing something that happened 3 chapters ago that's a story niggle is going to have the same effect, because the things I wrote yesterday are the things I wrote yesterday. They're gone, they're sealed off. Today. So the things I'm writing today, I might focus on trying to get that out as possible, but I'll allow myself to fix things. But once it comes to changing something that's spanning more than a chunk of writing time that I've set aside, so even if it's going back and fixing something that I wrote this morning, I probably, well, that's there, it's a first draft, I can fix it later. So you have to get used to walking away. It's a bit uncomfortable thing to do, because most of the writing that people do, unless they've been writing longer stories, novels, and so on, is on a very short time frame. So you write a report at work, you write the report, you fix the report as you go along, you email it to your boss and get comments back, and then you whack the completed thing out. So we're almost trained to not leave the mistakes in, to fix them straight away, because you're on this bump, 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 bump. Got to get the final product done now. It's got to be good. My boss is going to come and look at it and make comments about it. My teacher's going to come and look at it and make comments about it, depending on where you are. There's always this feeling of someone looming over your shoulder expecting you to get it done. Whereas with writing fiction, it's not the same timescales. There's no one, although it would be very nice if there was, who is utterly desperate for you to get that book out in 3 months' time rather than 4. So if you slip a month because you're doing things, that's okay. But also, it means that no one's going to be seeing that book until you put it out. No one's going to be turning up and looking at your first draft and going, there's a mistake in chapter 3. Because your first draft or a novel isn't anything like a report you're writing for work. No one other than you gets to see it. So potentially every time you get the desire to go back and fix something, just remind yourself, or stick a post-it note on the corner of your monitor, or whatever it is that works for the way you work, that no one's going to see this, you can fix it later. So you can have entire chapters that are bad and wrong and terrible, and no one will ever know, because you're going to go back and fix it. And you don't need to go back and fix it now, because you're going to go back and fix it later. So you can just write the good stuff. So remind yourself that that's what you're doing, aiming for the good stuff. The first draft isn't about fixing the bad stuff. It's about getting the bits that work so you can go back and put in more stuff that works. And until you've got to the end of your first draft, potentially you don't know what the good stuff is, because you could come to the last chapter and suddenly have this amazing idea about how it will be better if the book ends. So everything you do up until the end of the first draft could be something that you're going to chuck out. It probably isn't. A lot of it is probably going to stay, because a lot of it is probably better than you think it is when you look at it. Perspective, it's reasonable. It's very hard to write an utterly unreadable piece of work. And if you've got something that's kind of readable, you can fix it. You polish it later. So,
like, to give an analogy, and because I love analogies, it's like you're laying asphalt on a motorway and you see in the rear view mirror that there's some loose gravel on the asphalt. And do you get out of your asphalt laying machine and go back and sweep off the loose gravel, which then means that all the asphalt in your asphalt laying machine is cooling down and getting destroyed? Or do you just keep going and you'll go back and fix all the asphalt in one fell swoop at the end? It's kind of a very poor analogy. One thing I was going to go back to was your typos thing.
Yes.
Which is the reason why I can't really use Dragonbox, or I haven't been able to so far. Because Dragonbox, the speech recognition software, will get things wrong. And that will completely break my flow, because the things it'll get wrong, I want to correct. It'll get like, if you said as usual and it says Su Lal or something like that, and you're going, that's completely wrong. Oh my God, I have to go back and fix that. And that's destroyed my flow of writing. So that's why I can't particularly use Dragonbox, where other people have increased their speed. That decreased my speed because I had to fix things. And as well, it would have been confusing going back on the second draft. You go, what's a Sulal? I don't know what that is meant to mean.
Yeah.
But it's worth... Sorry, go ahead.
About finding your process.
Like, it's worked for plenty of people. It just didn't work for me. And it may work better in American English. Maybe it's better at that. Or even UK English or something. But it hasn't worked very well for me yet. And I've tried going back to it a few times, and I'm still persisting, because I do like the idea of bumping up my speed, and especially of giving my arms and hands a rest. Like, if I could alternate between typing and speaking, it means potentially I could write for longer, because if my shoulders are starting to hurt from sitting in the one position, I can then start talking for a while. We might end just on one last question that Colin asked. What are you better at, dialogue, description, or action? And why? What have you done to improve the areas you're not so hot at?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not consciously aware of being better at any of them now. In the first stories I wrote, I was terrible at dialogue outside certain parameters, because I trained to be a lawyer. I practiced law for many years, including an extended period where I was appearing in court to argue cases several times a week. So my entire experience of people talking was people who were trained in rhetoric, in convincing arguments, who'd been through a system that privileges a certain way of speaking. So most of my experience of how people spoke was like that. So I was terrible at writing dialogue for most people, because most people aren't trained in the somewhat stilted rhetorical style of someone presenting a legal case. Most people use lots of contractions. And so I was aware of that enough that I tried to swing the other way. So I came out with the comical mummer sets with the ums and the r's and the missing letters and so on, sirs, which again, whilst potentially phonetically it might be realistic for a certain area, and if you're writing fantasy, you can say, well, yes, that's how everyone in the town of Blingshire speaks. It's hell on the eyes to read. So my solution to being bad at the broad range of dialogue that you'd need to represent an entire world realistically was to listen to more people. Not eavesdrop so much as just, if two people are having a conversation loudly on a bus, instead of like shrinking down into your headphones, just listen to the way they talk, the sound, the words. The more you listen to the way people talk, the more you get a feel for the rhythms of spoken language. And it starts to get into your unconscious, so that if you need to pull out two people talking on a bus, those 6 different conversations you overheard on a bus sort of glom together, and you can come up with a heuristic for how two people on a bus might talk. And it's never going to be perfectly realistic necessarily, but it's going to be plausible. And that's what you want, something that's plausible that isn't like you. In fact, so description, dialogue, action. I like to think I'm reasonable at writing action, but one thing I do is try to actually act it out. And my wife can sometimes tell if I'm doing a fight scene because I'm all over the living room. Just sort of like, or checking things, or also, well, how far could you do a standing jump? So you're gonna go, oh yes, that's nearly 4 feet. I don't know if we can make it. And so you go, well, that rug's about 4 feet wide. Standing on one edge of the rug, can I jump over it? Okay, I can sort of make it, but I'm a little bit wobbly and I might not have done it if I was tired. But this is a heroic type with like muscles and manliness, so she'd be able to do it.
And life is on the line as well. Adrenaline's flowing.
Yeah, so but and obviously you don't need to go, well, okay, I need my character to be able to shoot the alien commander in the eye for 16 feet away. So I'll measure out 16 feet. I'll get my child to stand at the other end, and then I'll attempt to shoot them in the head. Because that's a step too far. But
well, plenty of people use toy soldiers and things like that. Like that's a possibility.
Yeah. I know that I'm quite forgiving when it comes to action scenes where it's not quite perfect in other people's work, although I try to sort of like make it work myself. But I know a few people who are incredibly hardcore on it, and when it comes to certain things like modern weapons, there are people who won't read a book because the hero uses a Glock 17 with an 8-round clip, and that doesn't exist. So
Chris Fox actually mentions that in his book, and he says that's so few people that just ignore them. Like, don't intentionally do bad research. But if you're not an expert in guns and you mess up, forget the 1-star reviews you get for that. Just don't worry about it. but certainly try and make it as realistic as possible. Like unless you're in a unrealistic world, like my Bitter End books, they've got the most ridiculous weapons anyway. So I try and picture it all in my head, but I'm not too worried about, oh, well, they've done all this and they have a strained elbow, so therefore they can't possibly wield this weapon or something. But at the same time, I try and be as consistent as possible.
Yeah.
But for me, anyway, the weakest thing is description, which is why my first drafts always have very little underwritten description, and then I fix it later, because for me, at least, that's the most difficult thing to write. So it's the thing that I kind of let go in the first draft so I can get through it. So I do try and write, a description of what's going on, description of what's around them, but I don't worry if I haven't described every little thing, especially the characters. Quite often don't describe them at all on the first draft. I just say, the doctor walks in, it's Dr. Jones, and she says, we need to go, let's get out of here. And that's, there's no, is she blonde, is she brunette, is she dark-skinned, is she light-skinned, nothing. Just,
well, in a way, the less you put in, the better the description is. Because if you describe an irrelevant detail, then that's something that then has to be well written to keep the reader in. And if it's an irrelevant detail, it's not something you need for the story. So if there is some reason why your character's hair color would matter, and that can be as simple as you want to differentiate them from a different character, so you just want to mention hair color to divide them, then add it in. But if you don't need to, if there's no reason why the character being from Namibia matters, then don't describe it. Let the reader decide that they're going to imagine the Doctor as Scandinavian if they want to, because it doesn't make a huge difference. So, and if you're, there's obviously a tricky area for diversity in fiction, that most people will imagine characters like themselves. So there's a social aspect to including race, gender, and so forth to have diverse characters, but you're writing for yourself. You're not writing because you are going to be single-handedly saving the world. So if you just don't want this story to be about how gender doesn't matter in your society, then you don't need to stick genders on people just to prove a point. You just let the reader imagine what gender the janitor is. And if most readers imagine the janitor's a bloke because they think that's what janitors are like, then you're not responsible for the fact that's how readers have imagined it just because you haven't described every single detail.
I mean, J.K. Rowling came out recently because Hermione in the new play is black, and said, well, I never said she wasn't. In the books, It doesn't say her skin color, so she can be black. So yeah, for me as well, I was going to say my strongest is probably dialogue. I quite like writing dialogue. And dialogue scenes, when I read them back, tend to be pretty close to what I'm going to have. One tip that works very well for me is I was watching a BBC documentary where they were talking to all these different showrunners who were talking about writing scripts, and I believe it was Stephen Moffat, but I could be wrong, that said that when he goes back to a script, he tries to eliminate every word he can from dialogue because people won't say them if they can get away with not saying them. So instead of saying, yeah, it was good to see you, I'll see you later, maybe we'll get a pint sometime, they'll say, good seeing you, pint sometime. Like, they'll cut out everything, or even less than that. And he says, go back, cut it down until you couldn't cut anything out or it'll lose the meaning, and that'll be what people will actually say. So that's quite useful. Grant, so we've reached our time limit for the episode. And I think unless there was anything else you wanted to say, Dave?
I don't think so. No, I mean, obviously, if you do have any other burning questions, actually, we've got another question in by Colin here.
Okay, great.
It can often be 2, 3, or 14 days between my writing sessions. Any tips for getting going with first drafts more quickly? Well, just quickly, my primary tip would be to take advantage of the fact that you can write something that isn't great that you're just going to fix later. So if you've got 15 minutes, then maybe that's enough time to open up your draft and crack out 5, even 10 minutes of writing. Because it doesn't have to be great. It's a first draft. It's just, if you can get even like 10 minutes done on a day that you wouldn't otherwise have done, that's a little bit closer to the end, and you're going to fix it later. So just slap something down. If you've got 15 minutes and you can't get into your headspace to do something that's descriptive, then do effectively a very detailed outline of the next bit of scene. So when you do have a little bit more time, you can come back and build that up into something more, because you've got kind of the framework of the scene already. So you're just sticking some detail on it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. So 14 days, I think, don't look at it as you have to do an hour's work on a draft. It's about momentum. And I would rather go and write for 2 minutes even on a day. Let's say I have no time at all, but I can just open the document, write 1 sentence, and then I have to close it again. I'd rather do that just to keep the momentum, to keep it fresh in my mind, because it's about letting your mind know that this is also important and you need to keep it fresh in your head. If you leave it 2 weeks, you'll forget where you are and you have to retrace your steps and find out where you are, and you've lost all your momentum. Like even 1 sentence would be enough to keep it at least pushing a little bit forward. Is what I'd say.
Yeah, definitely.
Grant, if there was nothing else, then we can probably end there.
Yeah, that's it, I think.
So thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.